Hey everyone, this is Gary. Welcome to this week's live Path to Prosperity webinar. Hang on, let me just double check things real quick here. Okay, we are live and we are recording, so welcome aboard everyone. Hope you're having a great week. It's obviously hump day. We're going to let everybody get logged in here. I can see the logins coming in now. So let's give everybody a few moments here. And tonight's session is the final of 4 sessions on property management. What's interesting about tonight's session is you're going to learn some other ways to make money in property management. Okay, it's all based on fee income. If you think about the banking industry, way back in the 80s, prior to Reagan deregulating I wouldn't say deregulating, basically, well, he somewhat deregulated banking. And what it did is it allowed banks to compete, and they were there for advertising, and they had unique products. And one of the things they did is the banking industry went from being a industry based on the interest spread, the money that they borrowed from bigger banks and the Fed. The rate they paid them was lower than the rate that they earned from lending that money out to consumers like us, okay? And also any money they had from their own investors. Well, that spread is how they made their money. 80s come along, and they became deregulated. They started merging and buying each other. Competition set in, which is good for consumers generally. And the interest spread was no longer a viable model. They went to a fee-based business. What I'm getting out of here is property management is based on the same fee-based model. And once you've got a client, there's multiple ways to generate fee income. In this case, not just from the owner, but really necessarily from the tenants and other entities related to real estate. I'm going to explain that tonight. So in any case, before we get into all that, though, just brief housekeeping. If you could always make sure you get the email the next day from Beverly. After every weekly webinar, there's an email that goes out. Tomorrow, I think, is going to be from Jody, because I believe Beverly's on vacation. So look for the email. It's got information in there about upcoming events, schedule changes, changes to the platforms, changes to systems. Like, for example, we're now using Zoom, of course. No longer we're using GoToWebinar. Also, the time trade link is going away after next week. You've all been given information about using, there's another scheduling system they're implementing for scheduling strategy calls with me. And in this interim here, this week and next week, you can use either of the 2 scheduling systems depending on when you're scheduling your call. As of July 1st, it'll just be the one surviving system. So in any case, things like that are in there. So always look for the email from Beverly. If you could all do me a favor, just hit your chat box there and let me know that you can see me and hear my screen. I'm going to check the attendee box. Hey Cedric, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you. Jeff Johnson, good to see you too. Actually, you're on those twice. double trouble. Okay, Jesse, good to see you, Jesse. Let's see, Louie, good to see you, brand new. Natalia, good to see you too. Pam, there's a blast from the past. How you doing, Pam? Patricia, Shirley, a couple of Shirleys. Shirley Ingersoll, brand new. Shirley LeBay, been here for a bit. Teresa, Will, good to see you guys. So in any case, let me reduce that panel and open up the chat box and make sure everyone is okay. Everyone is okay, so good. So far, so good. Okay, tonight's session, this is applying to property management no matter where you are. It doesn't matter what state or province you're in US or Canada. These are things that we can do. There are slight differences sometimes, like in Quebec province, for example, in Montreal, in other areas, it's actually, you cannot actually collect security deposits. It sounds crazy, but they don't allow it. That's very extreme, but there are other examples of where there are exceptions. For example, most of you know I live part-time up in Ontario, and in Toronto and some other cities within the province of Ontario, they won't let you evict anybody during the winter months, the cold months. They just won't let you do it. Also, there are instances where if a tenant can't pay their heating bill, guess who gets stuck paying the heating bill? That's right, the landlord. I've seen that happen before. Doesn't really happen in too many places, and those are just extreme examples of differences. What I'm going over tonight is the 4th of a 4-part series, and I'm going to talk about how you can actually make more money on property management. It's near and dear to our hearts. You know, I've got my own company. I know several people that do. Even if you just do this for on a small scale, you want to know these things so that you can see how you can make it more worth your while. So in any case, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. The prior sessions had to deal with marketing and screening, you know, marketing to get the right properties, marketing to get the right tenants, screening of the tenants. We went over the lease and security deposits and things like that. Tonight, we're going to go over different ways to make money by charging fees, fee income for different groups of people, okay? We'll also go over maintenance and repairs, capital improvements, and things like that. Okay, so we're going to kind of wrap things up tonight on this subject. So first things first, I'll give you an example of how we can generate fee income. For years, I've owned properties, lots of properties, and in the early days, I always had what I call a no pet policy, no pets allowed. Only to find out I had pets in my units, okay? Even though we would do inspections, things like that, we would routinely find somebody that didn't pay attention or forgot. Typical example was, you know, a young guy or a young girl gets a pet puppy or a pet kitty from their significant other, you know, boyfriend or girlfriend. And nobody thinks anything of it. Everybody's happy. We got a brand new little kitty, and nobody thought to look at their lease to see if they could have a kitty cat. So in any case, after enough of that, what I decided to do was institute a pet policy as opposed to a no pet policy. And I talked to several people who were more senior than me and had a lot of experience with this and gave me some tricks of the trade. And here's what I'm going to give you tonight, okay? And by the way, all of this material is actually in, there's a separate training program called Turning Rental Problems into Real Estate Profits. That's what I'm going to be going from tonight. You can all get the book. There's a small version of that training program, just it's a little mini book. It's on the Premier Books section on the resource page of My Investment Services. So you go to myinvestmentservices.com, click on member area, and in there you want to log into silver level, okay? On the left-hand side, scroll down to where it says Premier Books, and you'll see in there all of those are paid books, but you don't have to pay for them. So grab the one called Turning Rental Problems into Real Estate Profits, and you'll get a much higher level view of all these things I'm talking about tonight in the prior 3 weeks, okay? So back to pets. Here's what I learned to do, is institute a pet policy. And it all started with the advertising. So I would literally advertise in my ads for vacant units, pets allowed, okay? And I put a little asterisk there with a fine print, you know, see landlord for details, that kind of thing. So what I ended up doing was, I didn't want to see this myself until I actually did see it. My mentor kept saying, try it, you're going to like it. Because I thought, why would I want all these pets in my buildings? And just, I don't like them anyways. They make a mess and they, you know, smell and all kinds of stuff. And other people complain. Some people have allergies. So number one is in a building, if I had an apartment building, I wouldn't make the entire building pet friendly. I would only make like one wing or the first floor or something like that pet friendly, but not the other floors. So that way I could accommodate people with allergies and who just didn't want to deal with pets. So, but here's what I found out. It turns out the good pet owners would respond to the ads. They expected to adhere to a pet policy, and they expected to pay a security deposit, extra security deposit for the pet. And they all actually expected to pay additional rents, okay? So it ended up being a great screening tool, you know, because what would happen is people would call about one of the apartments. We always had to leave a message. Remember, we went over that in the first module, the first session of this. Had to leave a message, and then we can listen to the message, play it back, and then call them back at a time convenient for us. And we already had information from them based on the voicemail that they sent or the message they left on the machine. So in any case, just talk strictly about the pet policy here relative to the pet owners. So they would call up, we would interview them just like you do every prospective tenant. You first do a phone interview. And remember, we had the phone interview form that we fill out. So we fill that out, okay? Now, if they called about a pet-friendly property, we would know that because that was put in the ad and they had their own number to call. So we knew if they were calling that number, they were responding to an ad that we said pet-friendly, okay? So we could right away go into questions about the pet themselves, whatever the pet is, the dog, the cat, the rabbit, whatever, okay? And we've had some crazy, you know, people with snakes and all kinds of crazy stuff. Okay, alligators. We had an alligator one time. Didn't let that guy in. But in any case, it turns out as we went through the screening process, we would fill out another form for the pet, basically a pet form. The name of the pet, the type of pet, whether it's a dog or a cat in most cases, the type, the breed of the pet, okay, and the size of the pet. Now, cats are generally roughly about the same size. That was easy. But with dogs, you could have a dog less than 10 pounds and a dog as much as 200 pounds. So the reason this is important is somebody was calling about a third floor studio apartment, and they had a 200-pound Saint Bernard or something. Well, that's not going to work. Okay. You don't have to, that's not appropriate for the dog. It's not that's not a good move. So the screening process allowed us to match the pet owners with the correct units to rent. Okay. We fill out the form, all the pet information, and we would inform them and say, to basic screening process, please go drive by the property, make sure you actually like the area and the property itself. And when you're satisfied, you call me back and we'll schedule an appointment. Remember, we always do showings we always did them on Saturdays in 2-hour intervals at each unit. So we'd show property A for 2 hours, and we'd show it to anywhere from 4 to 8 people in that 2-hour time frame. Okay. And then we can move on to the next property, the next 2 hours, and so forth and so on. In any case, assuming these people call back and wanted to see the property, either in the first conversation or this subsequent conversation, we would inform them of our pet policy. We'd say, I'm great, I'm going to send you the pet policy, and you can see what is involved with having you and your pet stay at this apartment. So in the pet policy, we would describe to them that there's a separate deposit for the pet, okay, separate deposit form, separate signature, separate everything, and also additional rent for the pet. Now, we would add that as an addendum to the lease. So remember that. Please write that down. When you decide to entertain having pets at your properties, number one is security deposit. You should have a separate deposit for the pet, separate from your basic security deposit. And on the lease, make sure you have a pet addendum for the additional rent for the pet. Now, here's what we did as far as dollar amounts. I know you're probably wondering, well, what do we actually charge for this extra deposit? What do we charge for this additional rent? It was based on the size of the pet. So all cats were basically, an extra $100 in deposit and an additional $20, it's $25 now per month for the pet. The deposit is refundable, assuming the cat didn't do any damage to the property, but the rent is obviously not refundable. The rent is basically income. So it became a profit center for us is what I'm getting at. Now on the dogs, it was based on weight and the size of the property. So if somebody wanted to rent a 4-bedroom house and they had a 200-pound Saint Bernard, we would actually charge them an additional, around $600 extra deposit, okay? Because if you can imagine a dog damaging a property, you can go through $600 pretty quickly, okay? So that's not too outlandish. On the rents, it was based on the size of the dog and the numbers of bedrooms. So if the dog was, again, 200-pound dog, we would probably charge $50 a month. If it was a small little Chihuahua, probably $25 a month. Okay, so that's how we did that. Now, as it turns out, over time, here's what we discovered. Because of the screening process and disclosing the pet policy up front, we actually eliminated the bad pet owners for the most part. Bad pet owners were like, this looks serious. These people know what they're doing. I don't want to lose all that money on the deposit because I know Fido is going to tear up the carpet. And they wouldn't even bother to rent from us. They would go to some other person who didn't know any better and didn't have a pet policy and just said, oh, sure, pet's fine, and blah, blah, blah. Don't ever do that. So we ended up attracting the better pet owners. Now, again, remember I said the additional rents were non-refundable. That's basically income. So over time, what we found out was the few times that we did have damages, between the security deposits that we collect for those units, and we kept because of pet damage, and all the additional rents from all the other pets and all the other units, way more than compensated for the occasional damage that had to be repaired. We were actually making more money than we were paying on damaged carpet, for example. So the pet policy ended up becoming a profit center for us, okay? So I want to just check on the chat box here and see if we have any, before we go any further, see if we have any questions on the pet policy. By the way, if you ever do the in the training program, Turning Rental Problems and Real Estate Profits, you'll get all the policies. All the policies are in there, samples of these additional agreements and things like that. Okay, so let's do this. I want to move on to the next way we make money, which has to do with smokers. But sorry, real quick, one more mention on pets. When it comes to discrimination law, obviously protected classes include people with disabilities who need service dogs or service animals. So the one exception to all this is if you advertise pet friendly and you're approached by a tenant or prospective tenant who is on disability or basically just has a guide dog or a service animal, don't discriminate against them, okay? And I found out, quite frankly, they make really good tenants, by the way. They generally will stay a long time because they want to be in a safe place where their pet is welcome, or pets are welcome in general. And as long as you aren't too outlandish with your requirements, you can still charge additional rent and extra deposit. That's okay. What you can't do is you can't say, well, I won't allow you because of your pet. If you don't have to allow pets in all your properties. That's not what discrimination law says. But if you do allow pets, you cannot discriminate someone who needs a service animal. Okay, so so just keep that in mind. That's basically a protected class. Okay, sorry. Next group is the smokers. Same thing. Over the years, I would say, well, we have a no smoking policy, and from time to time, we'd get a call from a tenant saying, hey, so-and-so goes out on their balcony and they smoke in the morning and they smoke at night, and we can't enjoy our balcony because our smoke is wafting over to our balcony. And believe me, you don't want those phone calls. So what we decided to do is same kind of thing. We would say we actually have a smoking policy. There are certain floors where we do allow smoking, and there are floors that we do not allow smoking. Basically, we'd always make the top floor the smoker's floor. I know you're thinking, Gary, this sounds crazy. I did too in the beginning, but it turns out sometimes you have smokers anyways. They do it. You say no smoking. Most people won't smoke, but the ones that do, they'll think I'll step outside or go on the balcony or whatever. Or they'll sneak an occasional cigarette, and nobody will ever know. You ever heard that before? And you can smell it. You can smell it on the carpeting. You can smell it on their clothes. You can smell the smoke. So we decided to test this out. And we took one of our buildings and took the top floor, because we figured if they're all the way up top, and if they smoke, generally it's going to rise and it won't bother the people down below. We decided to test this out. And the same thing, just like the pets, we advertised it. We got a lot of calls, by the way. And it turns out we were able to charge additional deposit. We were able to charge additional rent. And at the end of the lease term, if the walls are yellow from the nicotine, or you just can't get that smell out of the carpet and you got to replace the carpet, you've got to have additional deposits to cover that. So what we did is we tested it out, and again, most cases everything was fine. People were respectful. They didn't damage the place. But every now and then somebody would definitely, and we had one place, the smoker was already there when we bought it, by the way. The walls were so yellow with nicotine. He'd been there for like 30 years. And by the way, he was a suit salesman. He was a suit salesman and just basically smoked like a chimney. But in any case, we couldn't get the walls bleached white. We literally had to paint the walls black and then prime them back to white. And then we could put a new coat of paint on it. And that's after we cleaned the walls and scrubbed them and used all kinds of materials to get rid of the smell, because the smell was actually in the material of the wall, like the drywall. It just absorbed it. It was crazy. We even had to rip out the carpet and again clean the subfloor and prime that. Okay, it was just an amazing work. So that was our lesson. We said, look, we've got to make sure we're covered on this type scenario should it reoccur. But at the end of the day, what happened is we had enough additional rents coming in from all the smokers. It was like a subsidy thing to cover the occasional damage that was done by one or two bad smokers who weren't that careful. And again, we kept those tenants' deposits. So between the retained deposits and additional rents, remember, rents aren't refundable, so we included all the rents from all the smokers. way more than compensated for the occasional damage we would see from the smokers who were not careful. It's a great way to make money. You just have to do it properly. Okay, we'll do one more category here of additional fees, and then we'll move on. And I'll actually go over all the fees that we do charge. Okay, so if we haven't done that yet, I'll rattle those off to you, and you can see why we like this business so much. Okay, so the last one is nuisance calls. Have any of you ever had a tenant where they just are just a nuisance? They seem to call for every little thing, like, hey Gary, or hey Jeff, I hate to bother you at 11 o'clock at night, but boy, the neighbor's dog is really barking and we can't get to sleep. And the neighbor's dog belonged to a neighbor that wasn't even your tenant. It was an adjacent property, for example. There's nothing you can do about that. Well, we made the mistake of starting to tell people, just call the police. You don't want to do that, because if the police show up at one of your units too many times, they can institute a policy, they call it a nuisance policy, a nuisance owner policy. And if your property is generating a lot of nuisance calls for the police, they're not going to go after the tenant. They're going to go after you, the owner or the landlord, okay? So we learned that lesson the hard way. We actually had a police officer tell us, say, look, he called us up and he said, if I go to your property one more time, I'm going to have to fill in a form. They consider this a nuisance property, and the judge, they can decide to cite you, give you a citation, and fine you. We didn't want to have that. So what we did is we instituted our own nuisance call policy. We put it right in the lease, okay? And if a tenant calls us more than 3 times in a week for something that's like, we would consider a nuisance, and we gave examples like barking dogs and things like that, we would consider the next call a nuisance call, and we would charge them $25, okay? That's what we did. And that really helped cut down on a lot of nuisance calls. So the calls that you want to get are the ones where there truly is something wrong. A water pipe broke, a window won't shut and lock properly. That's a safety hazard. Roof is leaking, anything like that. You definitely want those calls, okay? But the ones where, the neighbor's down the street, dog is barking, or the neighbor behind me is playing a stereo too loud, you can't get involved with that. That's that person's problem, okay? So lo and behold, we would charge a nuisance call fee. We didn't really make a lot of money on that, because quite frankly, people didn't want to get zapped with the extra money, so they would stop calling us for the nuisance calls, okay? The double-edged sword is this, is you don't want to scare people away from calling you. You do want them to call you for legitimate reasons. You just don't want to call you for nuisance reasons, okay? And that policy seemed to help that a lot. So let's do this. I'm going to pull up the chat box and see if we have any questions. So if you have any questions so far, guys, please type them in and let me know. And while you're doing that, I'm going to rattle off all the different types of fees that you can collect. So if you think about it, property management does generate basic management fee. 8%, 10%, 12%, 6%, just varies based on where you are. And whether you're managing a single family home or a large apartment building. In other words, if we manage a big building, we would give a break on the fee. We would knock it down sometimes to 6 or even 5% if there was 100 units or more, for example. Single family home is really not that bad as long as it's a good long-term lease. But where we really made our bread and butter were the small apartment buildings, okay? And we would charge anywhere from 8 to 10%. So in any case, so you got fee income. That's number one, management fee. Well, we also charge a leasing fee to lease a vacancy. That's typically either a half month's rent or a full month's rent, depending on where you are in the US or Canada, okay? So charging a 1 month's rent for the leasing fee to lease a vacancy, that's a big deal. We would charge, of course, the application fee for a prospective tenant to rent the property from us. That's the application fee. We would also charge a lease renewal fee. That's at the end of the year. Lease renews, we charge them a renewal fee. Okay, so you got management fee, lease the vacancy fee, lease application fee, lease renewal fee. Now we've also got pet fee, smoker fee, nuisance call fee. So those are the fees so far. Now that's not the end of it. That's just the fee income. We also charge the owners an additional 10% override on maintenance and repair calls. Now we manage the call, okay, but the contractor coming in, we've got to ensure that they get access to the property, they do the work properly, they get paid, they get their end of year tax statement. All these things have to be done, and that's over and above the normal call of duty is spelled out in your contract management, your property management contract. So, and 10% is not that big a deal. Okay. Now that's common in a lot of areas, by the way, to charge the owners a 10% override on maintenance and repairs. So what that means is the tenant has incentive, the owner has incentive to maintain their property well. Okay. Now, another way we make money is this. We would charge the contractors a 10% fee also on all the work we gave them. And I know I'm going to be ruffling some feathers here, but so let's just think this through. Number one is most of us are investors and or realtors, okay? And as realtors, we generally, get or receive a 25% referral fee on referrals, okay? So we pay 25%. We're just asking the contractors for 10%. And here's how we justify it. Number one is we ensure them you're going to continue to get work. And if you know contractors, they definitely want to get steady work, okay? We also tell them that we will guarantee that they're going to get paid for the job. And the reason we can do that is because we're the ones collecting the rents. Okay, so we collect the rents and we disperse for the maintenance and repairs. Do all the bookkeeping, give them all the reporting, give them their end of year tax statement, so forth and so on. So if you know contractors, that's worth it to them. Now, what they would do is obviously go back and then raise their rates by 10%. That's just what they did. So ended up, they got the money they wanted and we got extra 10% there. So as you can imagine, guys, property management can be a quite lucrative business, okay? A few more things to think about. Number one is it's also a great lead source. So every time a prospective tenant sends you their application, you've got current and prior landlord on there, and one of those folks is going to have a vacancy coming up. Well, now we can offer them property management. All right. Once we screen the tenants, we first screen the tenant, and then we say, by the way, we run a pretty sophisticated property management company. I see you're leasing this on your own. Have you ever considered property management? The benefit to you, Mr. Investor is, or Mrs. Investor is, your time is better spent finding the next deal. You should be paid tens of thousands of dollars for every investment you make. Managing properties is not paying you a lot of money. You might be saving a few dollars, a couple $100 a month at most. So it doesn't make sense for you to do that when you could be spending your time making thousands, tens of thousands. So let us manage it for you. And number one, we're really good at screening. This is what we're experts at this. This is what we do for a living. So just like painting, you don't ever want to paint your own place, hire somebody to paint because you're worth more than what the painters are making, okay? Now, having said all that, they're not all going to say yes, but some of them will. You could also say, why don't you just let me lease it for you? I'll just take care of the vacancy for you, charge a half month's rent. The bottom line is, did you have to pay for that lead? Just me, you and me, did we have to pay for that lead? Well, the answer is no. In fact, we got paid to take the application from their prospective tenants. So theoretically, we got paid to take that lead. I'm going to go over one more thing here, and then I'll go to the questions. Here's the other reason why we really like property management. It's because it's a huge source of contact information. So if you think about it, obviously you've got contact information on owners and tenants. That's two sources of business there, owners and tenants, right? The tenants want to become owners sometimes, and the owners want to keep buying and selling properties, okay? So owner and tenant contact information, that's two. You also have to deal with the municipalities, right? So you got municipal contact information for employees there. You've got utility company contacts, gas, electric, or hydro if you're in Canada, water and sewage and garbage and so forth. You've also got contact information for attorneys, right? In the case of evictions. The lenders who want to need to come and gather financial data for you because somebody's buying or selling the property. So you have lenders, appraisers to appraise the properties, inspectors to inspect the properties, of course, contractors we talked about, insurance people to insure the properties. All of this contact information that you and I can use to market to. And we didn't have to pay one dime for it. We got all this contact information for people all related to the real estate industry, and we can market to them at no cost to us. Didn't cost us a dime. So that's the other reason why we really like property management. All right, I feel like I kind of pushed that pretty good. So can you guys see now why we like property management? So if you can just type in your answer, let me know, and I'll see if we have any questions here. Let's see, this is Victoria. Hi, Victoria. Victoria has a discrimination law called arbitrary description, where people may complain if you don't want to rent to doctors or attorneys, etc. Do you know about that, and can you expand on it? Would it include pets? So, so just briefly, guys, here, big picture is this: whether you're in U.S. or Canada, you have federal or national law, discrimination law, and underneath that you have then state or provincial law. The state or provincial law cannot conflict with the federal law, but it can add to it. So you can add to the protected classes, okay? And also the localities can also have their own additional protected classes. So this right here, right away, to me, I'd like to see more of this, Victoria, because this says arbitrary description. So I think what they're trying to say is they want to prevent you and I from basically discriminating based on something that might not be a protected class, but technically we're excluding people because of some characteristic about them. I think that's what they're trying to prevent. But the fact is, in the case of smokers, they're not a protected class. Smokers are not a protected class, number one. Number two is people do have allergies to smoke. In fact, one of my nieces is definitely allergic to smoke. So you can definitely say smokers not allowed. There's no reason you can't say that. And if you do have a smoker's policy, just follow the model, which is separate that floor, make it a top floor or a separate building, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. When it comes to pets, again, people have allergies to pets. So pets are obviously, if they're service animals, they are definitely protected, or the owners are protected, excuse me. And by that, therefore, by that, the pet is obviously considered protected underneath the owner, if it's a service animal. So those are the only ones I really would cover. I would never say something like, we don't rent to, what would be an example? It's not a protected class. There's really not many people that are not falling under a protected class. Or how about this? How about white males? We will not rent to white males. That's not a protected class, by the way. Technically it is, because you can't discriminate based on, race, religion, gender, or anything else. And so technically white male would be a protected class, but let's think of another one. Let's think of, how about students, okay? Here's a good example, Victoria. We have student housing, and we prefer to only rent to graduate students as opposed to undergraduate students, okay? So based on what you're saying here, someone can make the argument that that's an arbitrary class. I would definitely argue that. I would fight back, and I would say, no, it's not. Graduate students want a quiet place to study. They're not into the keg parties and the all that nonsense that undergraduates get involved in. I've never been tested on that in any kind of a case. In fact, the graduates were typically medical students, interns, residents, even nurses and things like that. And they wanted that. They wanted those units to be just for them. And quite frankly, the undergraduates, they want to be where everybody else is an undergraduate. I think that's why we never had an issue with that. But that might be, Victoria, that could fall into that category. You know what I would do? I would call the California board, real estate board, actually call your state chapter of NAR, CAR, California Association of Realtors, and pose that question to them. Would advertising and renting to graduate students only be considered an arbitrary, or fall under that arbitrary description? I would like to think that you could support that. Now, here's my only reservation of what California did there is the fact that they call it arbitrary discrimination. The very word arbitrary is very vague. It's like, well, what does that mean? And everybody's wondering, okay, well, what can we do? Perfect example. 55 and older. You see lots of places all over the US and Canada where people will say we only rent to 55 and older. Well, somebody can make the case that that's age discrimination when it really isn't. People 55 and older often want to be in a place where everybody's 55 and older. They don't want to have families in their 20s with small children, and it's perfectly legitimate. It happens all over the place. But based on what California did, somebody can maybe make the case, hey, it's like reverse discrimination. They're arbitrarily discriminating against me because I'm not 55 years old. I don't know. I would like to think there's enough prevailing common sense in the state and the judicial system that would say that that's ridiculous and that does not fall under discrimination. So in any case, I kind of went probably long on that, but Victoria, I appreciate the question because it's an interesting subject and it always is being tested. In fact, the guide animals, service animals was really being tested a few years ago. People were just saying, well, I'm just going to call my pet a guide dog or a service animal. And they'd go get some thing or vest they put on the pet with a big plus sign, the medical cross, and a piece of paper that says my dog is a service. Well, the people again, level-headed, took care of that and said, no, the pet it actually has to be a certified service animal. You can't just arbitrarily say any animals, because people were saying iguanas were service animals, birds, all kinds of stuff was happening. People really pushing the envelope. Famous case was somebody brought a bird on a plane, said, this bird is my service animal. And it caused problems, as you might imagine. So in any case, great question there. So let's do this. Let me go back here. What I want to do right now, guys, is talk about maintenance and repairs. The reason is I mentioned that we do charge contractors a 10% override on maintenance and repairs. So let's just go to that next section here. I can do this without losing, let's see, I should be getting close here. Lease rules and regulations, we already went over that. Okay, I think I'm getting close to maintenance and repairs. Yes, maintenance and repairs, okay. So I want to just distinguish between maintenance and repairs as one category and capital improvements is another category, okay? So maintenance and repairs are generally smaller ticket items, $250 or less, that type of thing. There's lots of ramifications here, one of them being for tax purposes, okay? Small maintenance and repairs, you can generally write off the year you took the cost, the expense. However, if you have a large capital improvement, like putting on a brand new roof, that generally has to be counted against or added to the cost basis of the property, and therefore it gets depreciated over time. You don't write that off in one time, you depreciate it over time. Now, there are all kinds, I'm not a tax accountant, and I'm not a tax attorney, but I will tell you there's all kinds of rules out there and loopholes that people will pursue. And one of them is, in the States, we call it the tax rule 172, which means if you have a capital expense for a business, okay, the business is an LLC, or in case of Canada, a corporation, that you can actually choose to take that capital improvement as an expense in the year you took it, okay? It's a great strategy to sort of use the rules in your favor to maximize your tax position, what you owe or what you're owed. You essentially want to net out to zero. That's what you want to net to zero, okay? So in any case, having said that, if you own a property in your own name, that means you can't exercise Rule 172. But if you own a property in a corporation or any corporate entity like LLC, then technically you can use tax rule 172 and write off a capital improvement as if it was expense. Now again, this is the kind of thing you want to talk to your tax accountant about. Back to the class. What we do is this. On maintenance and repairs, routine, everyday maintenance and repairs, cleaning, painting, fixing doorknobs, repairing windows, things like that. Landscaping, lawn care, snow removal, things like that. We would generally pay out of the owner's rent proceeds. So let's say, I'm managing a property for Jeff, okay? And that month Jeff had, $50 in lawn care fees, a replaced doorknob at $50, a repaired window at $50, basically about $150. We would pay that out of the rent proceeds for Jeff, the owner. And then when he gets his proceeds, the net profit at the end of the month, it'd be the rent minus any other expense, taxes, insurance, anything that we're paying on behalf of the owner, water, sewage, garbage, hydro or electric, gas, and then maintenance repairs, and the net proceeds would go to the owner, okay? Now, in the case of a large capital improvement, anything that was over 1 month's rent for that unit, we would not take responsibility for that. What we would do is we would basically introduce the contractor with the owner, Jeff, and let them work out that arrangement between them, okay? And so in this case, Jeff, for example, would have to pay that contractor for the new roof out of his own proceeds, not from the rents collected, because rents collected is not going to be enough to pay for a roof. So I just want to make sure you guys write that down. We literally do draw a line between maintenance and repairs and capital improvement. Maintenance and repairs will take care of for the owner. Capital improvements, we shift the burden to the owner, let them take care of that themselves between them and the contractor. So everybody okay on that? If you have any questions, now's the time to let me know, guys, okay? That's a pretty, that can be a touchy subject. In fact, I would say over all the years, outside of landlord-tenant issues like evictions and debates on security deposits and things like that, when it came to routine operations between the owners and us, the property management, probably one of the biggest sources of not heated debates, but basically, you know, coming to an agreement or terms had to do with the difference between maintenance and repairs and capital improvements, because they knew about tax rule 172. And if something was $1,000 and rent is 900, they might say, look, just pay it. You're going to collect the next month's rent next month, and that remainder will be taken out of next month's rent. We learned to never do that. You never know when a tenant's going to move out, and all of a sudden you've paid for the contractor, and if you don't have enough money coming in from rent on behalf of that owner, you get stuck with the deficit. You're the property manager, okay? So in any case, hopefully I've made that point clear enough, and I beat that horse to death, okay? So let's do this. I want to move on to bookkeeping. Most of you who are entertaining the idea on this, in fact, if you could do me a favor, guys, type in your chat box, and if you're interested in property management, say, hey, Gary, I'm interested in property management, okay? And the reason is that what I'm going to go over next is pretty important when it comes to managing properties for you or for other people. And it has to do with bookkeeping. I got to tell you guys, bookkeeping is absolutely paramount. Daily, it needs to be kept up to date. You cannot get behind on bookkeeping when you're managing properties, because if you've got hundreds of units like we did, so over 700 units, and when you've got rents coming in every day, you've got expenses going out every day, I mean, you've got a lot of activity. You're leasing apartments, you're taking first month's rent, you're taking security deposits, all these things you're doing. And your bookkeeper has to keep that system up to date every single day, okay? Now, in the beginning, you can typically use a really good accounting system called QuickBooks. You've all heard of it, okay? I still use it myself personally, by the way. It's great for if you have maybe 100 units or less, okay? You can get QuickBooks Pro, and either QuickBooks or QuickBooks Pro is very well suited to property management, because you can set up, like, for each property its own class. So you could have different ownership entities. You could have different companies you set up within QuickBooks. So you could have Jeff Johnston owner, Jeff Johnston Holdings, and then that's a company. And then Gary Wilson Holdings is a company. Well, it's all under the same QuickBooks system. And then within Gary Wilson owner, within there I had my individual properties. We call those classes. So let's say ABC Main Street or 123 A Street is a class. 456 B Street is a class of separate properties underneath my ownership group, which is a separate company. So each company you set up would represent a different owner. And under that company representing that individual owner, you would separate out the individual properties based on what we call class. That's inside of QuickBooks. Makes it very easy to enter the debits and credits, to run reports, to cut checks, to do everything. Great little system. Now, what it doesn't have is a lot of feature and functionality that are very owner or tenant friendly. So what you want to do is that when you get to, say, more than 100 units, you should seriously consider a system called PropertyWare. To this day, it's like the Cadillac of property management systems. I've seen a bunch of them. There's a lot of good ones out there, but this is the one that we use. It has an owner portal, online portal. The owner can go on the computer at any time, 24/7, and take a look at the status of the property, the income that's come in that day, the last week, the last month, last quarter, expenses that went out that day, last week, last month, last quarter, last year, for example. They can also see maintenance requests that have been entered by the tenants, okay? So the owner, without calling you, without asking for a report, can quite frankly see everything they need to see about their property. Now, that's an owner portal. There also is a tenant portal. The tenant can also go into a portal and enter maintenance requests, screen ripped because of the branch, whatever. All kinds of things happen. They can type that in, and then your in-house property manager, who's in charge of maintenance and repairs, can take that and via email issue it to any one of your contractors. All almost completely automated, guys. It's an amazing system. And guess what else the tenants can do? That's right, they can pay their rents through the online portal, okay? So this is a huge time saver for you, the property manager. You got all this feature functionality enabling the owners and the tenants that frees you up from manning all of those phone calls and requests and all that kind of stuff. So real quick, let me check on the chat box here and see what kind of responses we got. So Louis is interested in property management. Hey, Louis, we'll talk more about that too. We've got a call coming up, I think, end of the week here. Shirley Ingersoll, same thing, both Canadians. Okay. Jesse, so 3 of you are interested in property management. I'm so glad to see that. By the way, and for those of you who don't know, for all the Americans in Ontario, you don't even have to have a realtor's license to manage properties. It's the craziest thing. It's one of the strictest places to get a realtor's license. I mean, it's like 230 hours of classes. And by the way, for those of you who don't know this, in Canada, it's been determined that I think from the Realtors Board, that they're now going to have the real estate licensing classes at the college level, okay? So they're going to basically make it a college level program. And there are college level programs in the States. In fact, Keller Williams, Gary Keller, got a degree in real estate, I think from University of Texas, let's see, what's in Austin? Texas State Longhorns, that's what it is, okay? The Robert Creamer, the guy I'm doing the commercial program with, he has a degree in real estate, okay? It's just not necessary in the States to have that. People will do it because it's a great thing to do. Well, in Canada, it's going to become I think it's going to become a degreed program. That's what I think. In any case, back to what I was saying. Oddly enough, you don't even have to have any type of license to manage properties for someone else in Ontario. It's crazy. I think they're going to be changing that. I've heard talk that they're going to be changing that. But in any case, so back to this, we talked about an accounting system. In the beginning, QuickBooks, very easy, very affordable. You can do QuickBooks online. I think it's like $13 US a month, something like that. The pro version is a little bit more. You can purchase the system, but I've learned the hard way with QuickBooks over the years. I've had it since the 90s. They do upgrades every couple of years, and if you have an older version, at some point they won't support it. Well, if you do the online version, it's in the cloud. Everything's kept on the cloud, all the data, everything secured, and you're guaranteed to have the update system. Just pay the monthly. I think we pay like $20 a month or something like that for the one I use personally. Okay. In any case, that's bookkeeping and accounting. Now, there's other things we can go over, guys, but it's about 10 till 8. And that was really the main thing I wanted to cover tonight, was additional ways to make fee income, pets, smokers, so forth and so on. Let me just make sure I haven't skipped anything here. Whoops, let's go back here. That was 6 and 7. This should be chapter 8. Let's just talk about evictions. This is the last, I think this is the last module anyways in the program. And I can probably cover this in the next few moments. Guys, this is the toughest part of the business, okay? In spite of our best efforts to attract, interview, and screen the right tenants for the properties, things sometimes go sideways. I mean, we're in the human relations business, and my gosh, between food, shelter, and clothing, we're providing, one of the 3, we're providing shelter for people, okay? So it's kind of a serious thing. Well, as you might imagine, human drama continues every single day. Every day, people are born, people die, people get jobs, people lose jobs. Um, people get married, people get divorced. All these things happen. People get transferred. Um, the point is this: it's always going to come back to you because you're providing housing, and that's part of their equation. What are they going to do under these circumstances? So from time to time, you're going to have to evict people. It's a hard part of the business. At first, I struggled with this. I was way too nice. Most cases, it's because someone didn't pay the rent, and they couldn't pay the rent because they didn't have the money. And now you're going to potentially evict them. And what are they going to do? I don't know. Well, I learned the hard way that you have to be a good business person or you're not going to be profitable. And if you run the risk of not being profitable, not only is your tenant going to be out of a place to live, you may be out of a place to live. So remember the old adage about on the airlines, when you get on an airplane, remember they tell you in the case of lost cabin pressure, who puts the mask on whom first? Yeah, you put your own mask on first, and then you help the guy next to you. So the point is this: is make sure you're running a viable, profitable business. You can be charitable personally. You can even be charitable through your business, but make sure it's accounted for in your pro forma. So if you let people off the hook on the rent, you do that too many times, you're not going to be profitable, okay? So I had to learn that I had to stick to the rules. I had to stick to the contract, in this case, a lease, and enforce it. And the fact is, the other thing that could go wrong, if you don't enforce that, and other tenants find out that you've been lenient on one tenant, well, guess what? They're going to wonder can you be lenient with them too? Now, nobody's paying the rent on time. So absolutely enforce the terms of the lease. And when somebody's late, give them the warning. And then if they don't comply, then you go file the landlord-tenant complaint with the local magistrate and follow through. In most cases, people will pay up and they'll be okay. But occasionally people just can't, and they have to move on. And if they're not going to do it themselves, you've got to give them a helping hand. You can tell them, I'll give you a little secret here. Depending on the circumstances, we've actually gone as far as saying to a tenant who's not paying rent, look, we don't want to make this any harder on you than it already is, okay? However, this is how we make our living. We have to rent this out. We got to collect rent so that we don't end up in the poorhouse like you. I'm willing to give you enough money on Saturday to rent a truck and move your belongings out and put them in storage, okay? I'll work with you on that, but you've got to work with me. In a lot of cases, people would say, I'll take you up on that. They rent a truck for free, they get free storage, and they buys them time. Maybe they go live with an in-law or something for a while till they can get their affairs in order. But then you get your unit back and you can put it back on the market and generate revenue again. It's an old trick we learned. In any case, let me just check here. We got questions. I know this always generates questions, by the way, because some parts of the US and Canada are very tough on owners. Some parts are very tough on tenants. I can tell you in the States, it's New Jersey, New York, California. Those are the top three toughest on owners states. The ones that are most lenient on owners are like Florida, Texas, things like that. And in Canada, I can't tell you about Vancouver because I haven't done this there, but I can tell you in Quebec and in Ontario, Quebec's pretty tough, guys. I know the Canadians all night are in Ontario. Just know this, it's actually tougher in Quebec. Okay, so let me check the chat box because I see we got a question popping up. This is from Chris. Hey, Chris. Gary, if a tenant gets a transfer and needs to break the lease early, what do you usually charge? So, all right, Chris, according to the lease contracts, the tenant is actually responsible for the remaining balance of the lease. Now, what a magistrate will tell you is that's true. However, if somebody has to move because they're being transferred and you release the apartment a month later and you're not out the remaining 5 months of the prior tenant's outstanding lease, that you can't collect that. You've got to you can't double dip. You can't collect rent from the old tenant who left 5 months early and at the same time collect rent from a new tenant who moved in during a time frame. So most magistrates will say that's how they interpret that rule. So what I do is this, to just avoid any kind of a conflict, Chris, I'll say this. So I say, look, I'll let you out of the lease as long as you pay next month's rent, okay? And I'll get your security deposit back because it takes me a month to advertise, basically clean advertise, market, screen, interview a new tenant. And most tenants want to move in at the beginning of the next month. So essentially you're out a month, okay? So I would make that offer, and most people would take you up on it. In fact, if somebody's being transferred, sometimes their employer would pay that. And if you tell them, hey, I just 1 month's rent, that's all I'm asking for, they would gladly do that because they're thinking they may have to pay the remaining balance of the lease. And home reload companies actually will do that. So Chris, that's my answer. That's what I would do with someone who does have to leave early. It's legitimate. They've been a good tenant. They're paying their rent. I would say cover the next month's rent and you're scot-free. Okay. So hopefully that helps. And that's a great question, by the way, too. In any case, as far as the eviction process, guys, there is a document you can find online. I think we've sent it out before. It's basically the landlord-tenant law for all the different areas. Okay. Again, you'll see some are lenient, some are very strict. But what I would do is I would just Google landlord-tenant law in your state or province and print it off. That's exactly what I did. I literally printed it off. Okay, and I kept it. I studied it, made my notes, and I knew exactly what to do wherever I had properties. And essentially, here's the process. You first have to give notice, okay? Yes, I know some leases, some areas will allow you to waive the right to notice. You don't have to notify the tenant. You can just go right to the courthouse, the magistrate, to file a landlord-tenant complaint. That's the next step. Or if you waive the right to notice that, then filing the landlord-tenant complaint becomes the first step. Then you have a hearing, usually 1 to 2 weeks later. That's the hearing. That's the third step. In the hearing, assuming you win, you get granted. Basically, they grant you. You win the case. You're entitled to your back rents, and they won't give you possession yet. What they'll give you is called right of possession, but you have to record that. You got to go back. You got to go back again, usually 10 to 20 days later, to now file for possession because the tenant still hasn't paid the rent. All right, so they granted you possession. You have to go back to claim it, go back to court again, and they'll say, yep, the guy's not paying, doesn't show any sign he's going to pay. I'm going to grant you possession. The tenant still has, again, depending on where you are, 10 days, 20 days to make good on that. If they still don't, then you go back again, third time, and then the court will actually issue that to a local constable who will come and post the property, say you're essentially been evicted, you need to vacate, I'm going to come clear the premises out in 7 days, something like that. You actually got to meet them there and change the locks and everything. And I've actually seen that happen, not very often. And guys, I got to tell you, over all the years, I mean, literally over 30 years, I think I've had maybe 3 occasions where we literally had to have a constable remove people from the premise and change the locks. Very hard thing to watch. I mean, it's not a lot of fun. But that's the basic sequence of steps involved with getting somebody out. Now, at any step along the way, the tenant can appeal. You could win at the magistrate's level. The tenant can get neighborhood legal services for free and appeal that case up to what we call the arbitrator's level. You could even win again, and they'll even appeal it again to the court of common pleas level. So, some tenants are pretty savvy, and if they sense that there's a reason to believe they can postpone their eviction, they'll do it by filing appeals. Okay. In any case, enough of that. It's a hard subject to talk about. It's not a fun way to wrap up the webinar. But what I want to do is tell you this. So next week, on the 24th, is our next webinar, and we're going to switch gears. If you have a particular subject, guys, you want to cover on the 24th, please let me know what that subject is. Just email me, Gary@myinvestmentservices.com, and say, Gary, I want to talk about this. And I'll talk. Remember, you have input into what we talk about on these webinars. Okay, this whole thing came about because we were getting a lot of questions on property management. And I decided to make it a 4-part series because it's such a big subject. So if you want to talk about something else, just let me know what that is in an email. So I know one of the things that we've been putting off is talking about online marketing, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, things like that. So we can talk about that next week if you want to. That's been on the back burner. In fact, I just got a comment. Hey, Jeff, good. Hey, yeah, so Jeff brought it up. What were you going to do social media? So let's do that. If I don't hear anything else, otherwise, guys, let's plan on next week doing some social media. And we may have to break that up into 2 sessions. I'll see how we do next week. So in any case, in the meantime, thank you for participating. I appreciate the opportunity to teach and to serve. I look forward to seeing you next week. If you would like to go to Boston for the 3-day event there, again, it's August 23rd, 24th, and 25th. 25th being a Sunday is a half a day. And it's a great time of year to be up in the Boston area. We've got Cape Cod close by, the great beaches of Maine. New Hampshire is right up the road, great mountains, rivers, lakes. It's just an amazing part of the country, guys. And come up and get some lobster and maybe see a Sox game, okay? But let's hang out and have some fun. I love doing the 3-day events. We're not going to do as many. It turns out they're a lot of work. So we'll do probably one more this year and maybe do 2 next year, and that'll be the pattern. So forth and so on. So any case, you guys take care of yourselves. God bless you and your families, and we will see you next week. Okay, take care, guys. Bye-bye.